Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first of our R&D updates this season. We've got a range of speakers today. As you'll probably note if you've seen the agenda, it's not quite so R&D focused. Yes, there's some science, but there's also quite an interest out there, as many of you have told me, in knowing a bit more about the new varieties and going forward. So we've got a little bit of a G3 update on the agenda today. The structure of the day is we've got about 5 speakers, and we'll go through them one after each other, no questions in between, and then we'll have the question and answers at the end. I'm going to start with John Burke, who's going to give just a quick overview of the KVH situation, and then we'll get into the science from Stuart Kay. So, John.
Thank you, Dave, and good afternoon, everyone. And if I haven't seen you before, Happy New Year. I think looking at the body language out there, it's looking a bit better than it was about this time last year. I think there's some hints of optimism on the horizon, which is good. You all know we've probably had an ultimate test summer period, which is probably good in a way, in that we've been able to observe, and we're going to get reports through here this afternoon of what we've been seeing out there in the field. But I mean, the key thing that we're all aware of is what's happening to 16A, and I mean, I've even had growers ring me just in the last few days when we've had some pretty good weather, saying that there's some, where they thought they were looking pretty good a few weeks ago, things are looking a bit grim. So the old 16A is not hanging in that well, but hopefully for you that are trying to get crops through for 2012, that you are able to do so, because I mean, we all know what impact that will have on your cash flow if you can achieve that. We know that we're going to have to live with PSA going forward, and I think the theme for today is all about how do we recover our orchards. That's the recovery pathway, and how do we live with it going forward. Just a point that I want to just stress today also is that if we're looking at new infections, and for those of you who have been watching the statistics, the rate of infections, reported infections, has dropped off. And we get various questions, well, is that because KVH is not paying for testing anymore in Te Puke? I don't think that's the case, but I just stress to you all that we need to know where the infected orchards are. So we need reported, we need to have those tests done. We'll accept in Te Puke verified reports from tech reps as to symptoms and record that as PSAV. We need to know where that infection footprint is, and also obviously wider afield. That's so important to us. I don't think anymore there's a stigma about being a red dot on a map. It's important we know what's happening, but I think the slowdown in reported orchards is probably seasonal. And what we're really observing is increase in infection and within orchard rather than new orchards, which is something which will give us an idea of epidemiology going forward. Just briefly, the recovery pathway. We had a meeting with all the banks last week. Peter McBride, myself and John Lachlan. We met with them. We've met with them about 3 or 4 times. So we got them all together, gave them an update on the situation, talked about the recovery pathway in terms of financial support for growers. And it's interesting, the banks have been really good right from the outset, and we've had an open book approach with them, and they've been really good in what they've fed back to us. And I have to say that is still working really well. The banks are interacting amongst each other, which is good. One of the difficult things we've been trying to do, and we've got underway, is a debt survey. We know that there's roughly $700 million worth of debt out there amongst growers. What we want to do, and Lincoln need this for their impact analysis report they're doing, they need to understand where that debt lies. Sort of like the demographics of the debt, and particularly amongst gold growers, because the gold growers that are going to really hurt are the guys that have already cut out their vines now, up until now, and won't be getting a 2012 crop. Those are the people that are, if you had a cab sitting on the rank, that's where the real issue lies. And trying to drill down and say, well, amongst all those growers, where does debt lie? Not wanting to know on an individual grower point of view, but just in a general sense. So, and Lincoln need that to be able to factor that into the impact analysis report, and then looking at the roll-on effect with cutout of gold going forward. The other key aspect of the Lincoln analysis report, which is due at the end of February, is there's a crop estimate that's being processed at the moment. That's the first CAPEN-based estimate, and in there has been a survey on cutout. So that is really crucial for putting some quantity around this impact assessment. Out of that, Lincoln will do the assessment and they'll look at examining a business case for perhaps a government support in a recovery pathway. And we're at the point now we're talking to the banks, and we'll be soon talking to government of how the mechanisms of that might work. So that's a bit of an update from me. So I'll hand it over to the next speaker, Stuart.
Thanks, John. As Dave said, we're going to give a bit of an overview of some of the results that we're seeing coming through for the new cultivars. Jane and Leighton are going to speak a bit later about the grower observations, or the observations on grower properties. What I'm going to talk about now is some of the observations that we've got from research trials and also from lab trials and a whole range of different sources. So, just make sure start off with this slide. Just to reiterate, I think I made the point last time I spoke to you that, good success here is really going to be a combination of things. It's going to be a combination of good cultivars with good orchard management practices. Now, breeders have a formula to make this more scientific, and it's up the top there. It's G by E by M. And what that simply means is for any plant, the way it responds is a combination of genetics plus the environment plus the management things that you put in place. So for PSA, what we know, we've got an environment which has got PSA in it. We've got an environment that looks as though it's pretty good for PSA growth and pretty good for PSA to move around and to infect our plants. So that really leaves us with two parts. The G, which is the genetics, and the M, which is the management. And that's why when we're talking about the control or the management of PSA, those two parts are very, very critical. And Jason and others are going to talk about some of the management stuff later on. And what I want to talk about now is the G part, the genetics. And what we need there is we need some good cultivars to put alongside those good management practices. So I guess the first question is what is a good cultivar? And we talked a little bit about this before, I think last time as well. And it's a combination of things again. It's all those good agronomic traits, being the right colour, having the right flavours, all of those things which have really been the whole basis of the Zespri plant and food breeding program for a long time. What we need on top of that is obviously cultivars that can tolerate PSA sufficiently. Now I've used the word sufficiently very, very carefully, because ideally you'd want something that was totally resistant and didn't have any chance of getting PSA. But right now we haven't got anything that fits into that category. So what we're talking about is cultivars which are sufficiently resistant so that when you put them together with the management practices, they'll be a viable option on your orchards. So it's about identifying the cultivars which are sufficiently resistant to PSA to be put together with the management practices to be a viable option. So that's what we're looking for. Have we got any cultivars that sit in that category now? Have I just lost it? Oops. So what are the bits of information that we've got to try and answer those questions? Well, as I said, there's a number of pieces of the puzzle. We've got some information from research trials and from the breeding program. We've got some laboratory assay results, which I'll talk to you in a bit. And then the last piece of the puzzle is those grower plantings and observations from actually out in the field. Now, no one piece of this is going to be the whole answer, and it's going to be all of those pieces of the puzzle that give you the picture of whether we've got cultivars which are sufficiently resistant to PSA. But the first piece, those laboratory trials, the principal laboratory trial that we're using is, and you may have heard of, is the woody stem bioassay. In this bioassay, what we're doing is we're taking pieces of cane and we're inoculating it with PSAV. And we're looking at how the PSAV grows on that. The reason we do some of this stuff in the laboratory is that it's under very, very controlled conditions. So when you're looking at that G by E by M equation, you can try and minimise some of those factors. You can try and minimise some of the things that cloud how important the genetic component is. Now, you're never going to be able to completely eliminate those, so you do get some variability in your trials. And we already know very, very well that management and the environment have an impact on the tolerance of different kiwi fruit vines to PSA, or the resistance to PSA. So how does the woody stem bioassay work? Well, to give you an example, here's 4 different stems that have been inoculated. The top one with water, this one with a Pseudomonas syringae from tomato, this one with the Pseudomonas syringae LV, and this one with PSAV, which is the virulent strain that we're facing. And you can see here where there's water, essentially you get a slight browning and no response. Here, where there's PSS tomato, maybe a slight hypersensitive response. PSA LV, maybe a slight hypersensitive response. But with PSAV, what you get is this large spreading lesion, and eventually you'll start to see the PSA ooze back out of those after those lesions. And what we're able to do is to measure the size of these lesions and look at the amount of ooze, and that gives us an indication of just how good that genetics or that particular cultivar is. So here's some examples. Close up here showing the lesion, and a close up showing some of the ooze starting to come out of the tissue surrounding the lesion. So there's a number of ways you can use that information. You can use it raw. Just look at the lesion size, and I'll show you some results of that in a minute. Or you can do what we're also doing, which is to take the size of the lesion and the ooze and combine them statistically to give an index, which is an indication of the relative response of the different cultivars to PSA. So that's all well and good, but I guess you're more interested in what the results are. And here's some results for what I would consider to be the green cultivars, which are the ones which have shown those good agronomic traits. As you're aware, PVR means that I have some difficulty putting the full names on, but the ones I can, I have. And on here you'll see Hayward, you'll see G14, and you'll also see Hort 16A. So I put them on there as controls. So the size of the bar gives you an indication of how the cultivars responded to that challenge inoculation. And you can see here, Hort 16A, very tall bar means that it's had a large lesion and lots of ooze. Hayward with a smaller bar has had a smaller lesion and less ooze. And down here we've got G14, which has been through the bioassay test 3 times now, hence there's 3 bars. And you can see in all of the cases it's towards this end of the graph, and the bars are relatively small, showing that the response is something fairly similar to Hayward in terms of the bioassay results. These are some results for gold cultivars this time. Again, you've got your Hort 16A and your Hayward as benchmarks. And here you've got Y3, which is G3. I'm sorry, the names have been changed, but Y3 is G3 and Y9 is G9, just to confuse everyone. And you can see again we've got 3 replicates or 3 different bioassays that have been done with gold 3 and 3 different bioassays that have been done with gold 9. And there is some variability, but they tend to be more to this end of the graph, showing that they're better than Hort 16A in terms of their response to the bioassay, and perhaps not quite as good as Hayward, but certainly down the end that we would prefer them to be. This case, it's just the lesion, so I've just taken out one little component, so it's not the index, it's actually just the size of that spreading lesion. And again, it's for gold cultivars showing the same trend. So Hort 16A, Hayward, gold 3, gold 3, gold 9, gold 9, gold 9, gold 3. What I've done here is I've put on all of the results we've got for Hayward, all of the results we've got for Hort 16A, and I've put on some averages, and I've also included all of the results for G14. The idea is to show that there is some variability, but to give you an idea of the generalised position of these new cultivars. So all of the yellow ones are your Hort 16A, all of the green ones are your different Hayward results, and these three down are G14. And I think you can quite clearly see that the G14 is more similar to the Hayward than to the Hort 16A when you look at the overall trends across all of those bioassays. Same deal with Gold 3 in this case, Gold 3 down here, Hayward, and then jumping up to the Hort 16A. Gold 9 down here, similar to the Hayward, jumping up to the Hort 16A. So I guess what that's telling us is in terms of the bioassay result, which remember is only one part of the puzzle, it looks as though those three new cultivars are looking more resistant than Hort 16A and probably somewhere akin to Hayward. And really, that's about as much as we can take from the bioassay results. And what we need to do now is to put them together with some of the other bits of information. So let's do that now. Let's look at some field data. And this horrendous picture shows you what our clonal block at Te Puke Research Station looks like, TPRO. And all of the vines which are marked in black are the ones that have died and we've had to remove. The ones in blue are the ones that we've had secondary symptoms, but we've been able to prune them back. And the vines in yellow and white are the ones which aren't showing any secondary symptoms at this stage. They probably all had spotting, but they haven't shown any secondary symptoms at this stage. If I overlay very quickly, that's the Hayward, and you'll see up here that there is only one Hayward vine so far which has shown any secondary symptoms, and we've had to prune back. G14, a similar situation, only one vine that's shown secondary symptoms and we've had to prune back. This one's showing all of the Hort 16A, and I guess it's showing exactly the opposite trend. We've only got one vine left in there, all the rest have been removed, and as of yesterday that one was about to be cut out because it was just in an awful state. So essentially all of the Hort 16A is gone from that block. G3, we've got vines. One of them's completely free of secondary symptoms. The other ones are showing some degree of secondary symptoms. Typically this is pretty minor. It's a bit of shoot dieback, nothing more than that. G9, a similar sort of trend. No vines without any secondary symptoms, but the secondary symptoms, when they are there, seem to be compartmentalised or constrained just to the shoots. Although, anecdotally, the guys are telling me that they think Y3 or G3 is looking better than the G9. So that's one orchard. This is another clonal block. So here we've got two different orchards. Two different lots of management, two different lots of environment, but the same genetics. So by doing this, we can actually say, well, hey, if the trends are the same, then that's telling us a lot about the genetics because the environment and the management structures are different. So same deal here. The ones in black have been removed. The ones in blue are the ones that are being progressively managed, and the ones in white and yellow are the ones which are showing no secondary symptoms at this stage. Hayward, completely free of secondary symptoms at this stage. G14 or green 14, completely free of symptoms at this stage. Hort 16A has entirely been removed. It was starting to go down quite badly, so it was removed to protect the rest of the block. So it's completely gone at this stage. G3, no symptoms, no secondary symptoms at this stage. And the G9 not showing any secondary symptoms at this stage. So trying to put that into something, take all of that information and summarise it down a bit. What you've got here is a couple of graphs from those two different orchards. And what I've done is I've put the all the different cultivars across the bottom. In this case it's green field data. And I've used the same colours. So the yellows are the proportion of the vines that had no secondary symptoms. The blue is secondary symptoms that were being managed, and the black is the ones where we've had to remove the vines. So if it's a totally black bar, that means we've got 100% of the vines have been removed. If it was a totally yellow bar, it means that 100% of the vines are at this stage free of secondary symptoms. So this is Te Puke Research Station, and you can see the Hayward and the G14 are both we've got one vine which is showing some secondary symptoms, but we have got a number of other green cultivars which are completely clean at this stage. Compare that to the other orchard, basically showing the same trend with the green cultivars appearing to be a lot more resistant to PSA than the gold cultivars overall. This is the gold data for Te Puke. You can see down this end a number of cultivars, completely black bars, which means that we basically had to remove them. There was no way we could manage them through. Hort 16A sitting at this end, that one vine that I talked about, which was pretty toast yesterday. Y3 and Y9 at the other end of the graph, showing, in the case of Y3, one vine without any secondaries, and then the rest of the vines showing some degree of secondaries. You compare that to the other orchard, Y3 and Y9, totally free of secondary symptoms, again at this end of the graph, compared down to Hort 16A and some of the other gold cultivars which have completely essentially started to collapse. Just for completion, some of the red data here, showing a very similar trend to the gold, which you might expect given that the genetics, they're both the same species. Here you can see that we've got a number of cultivars which are collapsing and some up the other end which are holding through. The other bit of field information we've got two more blocks on the research station, one which was grafted in 2010, one that was grafted into 2011, over to new cultivars. At this stage, the Hort 16A and the Bruce and the Sparkler have either collapsed completely or are certainly starting to collapse. And on those particular blocks, the G3, the Gold 3, the Gold 9 and the Green 14 have shown some spotting, but are basically symptom-free at this stage. Dave stood up, so I have to speak faster. The last piece of information I've got here is coupled with something you've heard about earlier from Mike Manning and Ian Horner. This is looking at a trial examining the progressive development of the disease on both Hayward and Hort 16A. It's now been extended to Gold 3. And the results of that trial are just starting to come through. We've now completed 2 rounds. The first round we found some minor incidents of leaf spotting and a very, very small amount of secondary disease. They've done a further round and there was a little bit of progression. We're not sure how material that is because we're currently doing the same monitoring round on the Hayward, which will give us a benchmark for comparison. So that information's coming through shortly. And I'll just finish with this slide again, just to make the point that it is a combination of things. We are faced with a fairly challenging environment. Management practices are going to be a big part of it, and I think we are making some progress there, some good progress there. And in terms of good cultivars, certainly we've got some fantastic cultivars in terms of their agronomic traits. What we're now doing is seeing whether they've got the PSA traits which are going to get us through. And at this stage, I think that what the pieces of the puzzle that I put up in front of you are suggesting is that they are certainly better than Hort 16A. They're looking like they might be in the same ballpark as Hayward, and there is some optimism in terms of their ability to be managed through. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Stu. We'll carry right along. I'm going to ask Jane Chamberlain to come up now. She's going to give you a little bit of an insight into some observations from the field. This is work that her and a number of others around her are involved in. And when we get to questions, I'm going to ask Leighton Oates to come and join us on the stage. He may be able to answer some of the specific questions you might have about the observations we're seeing. But Jane, come on up.
Thanks, Dave, and good afternoon, everyone. So as Dave said, I'm very much up here as part of a team across KVH and Zespri that has been working on getting these in-field observations. And I did just want to acknowledge a few people specifically who have been the ones out there getting the data and then collating it for us so that we can present it here for you today. And that's namely William Max, who's been working alongside Val Baker's team, and also Leighton Oates and Braden Hungerford in KVH. So this sort of follows or reiterates some of what Stu was saying. Stu's been talking about the scientific data, the laboratory results, those bioassays, and then the in-field replicated and randomised field trials that they have underway. So I'm now up here obviously to talk about the next part of the equation. What are we actually seeing out there in the field? And what's happening out there in the real world, if you like? And then this whole body of data gives us an indication of what the PSA tolerance is looking like around these new varieties, gold 3, gold 9 and green 14. And finally, it's out of the scope of what we're talking about today, but we do also have to consider, and again Stu mentioned this, but those supply and demand attributes of any new variety. How does it taste? What's its yield? All those types of things too. So specifically what I'm going to cover off, I'm going to do a bit of context first, just to recalibrate us really about what are the strengths and weaknesses from in-field observations. And then I'll get into what you're really interested about, what have we been seeing out there. Now we've had 3 monitoring programs underway around the new varieties. The first one was put in place to answer the question, can we establish under high inoculum pressure? The second monitoring program we've got underway was set up to answer the question, how tolerant is gold 3 under high inoculum pressure? And the third monitoring program that we have underway is, what is the speed of symptom progression through blocks or new variety blocks, again in high inoculum pressure? So all this work is done in the Te Puke priority zone to date. And then I'll just have a final slide summarising all this and saying, well, what can we take from this at the moment? So the context of in-field observations. Well, the weaknesses first. There is a lack of comparability. Obviously, it's not a science trial, so we have what we have on the orchards. We don't always have an anchor of the Hort 16A and the Hayward performance, so we just get what we're given. A lack of consistency. Obviously, every orchardist manages their orchard different, they're in a different environment, etc., etc. And sometimes there's a lack of complete data. We don't always know what the rootstock is. We don't actually always know exactly what the spray program is. However, the power of in-field observation is it is the real world. In the end, things are variable. So how are these varieties holding up out there? And also the other advantage is we can get large data sets. And you can see we've been across a number of orchards here. So then we can actually bring ourselves up and say, on balance, how are these varieties looking as far as their tolerance with PSA? The last context, though, that I wanted to give before I do get into the results was to say, I mean, we all know we've been through a relatively high infection period with the rainfall that we had in December. So NIWA, on their site, said that December 2011 we had over double the rainfall relative to the long-term average, and the highest rainfall we had was on the 30th of December where we had 98 millimetres, so significant rainfall. So let's start talking about the first monitoring program. Well, we wanted to quantify the new graft success and current level of infection on orchards cut back due to PSA. And sorry, that map's not that clear, but we just wanted to show here that most of them were on Te Matai Road and Mark Road. We did have one over here that was added in sort of a bit later, but most of these orchards were ones that were cut over or were part of that initial priority zone. So these were some of the initially highly infected orchards. They're all on Bruno rootstocks, as far as we know. All the vines were cut below the graft. Grafting happened last winter, July, August, and the protective sprays on these orchards were variable from nil to frequent. So the first measurement we did was around graft success on these orchards. So up the side you have 0 to 100%, a success rate. Each bar donates an orchard. That one where you see there's an orange, a green and a yellow bar is one orchard. It had all 3 varieties. Orange is Gold 3, green is Green 14, and the yellow is a couple of Hort 16A orchards that we monitored. So on average, across these varieties, the graft success rate was 85%. But you can see Green 14 is actually lifting that average a bit relative to where the Gold 3 success rates are. Now typically, and what we saw with our pre-commercial trialists, we would expect a 90 to 95% graft success. So potentially lower than we would normally expect. Now why is this? Talking to the orchardist of one of these Green 14 orchards that had a relatively low success rate, he had red ooze coming out of his stumps, and so those grafts didn't take. Close to half these orchards cut out in the first quarter of last year, so potentially there was some stump dieback, but we also believe that it was due to grafting technique to a certain degree as well. So on the grafts that were successful, in these orchards with a lot of inoculum pressure around them, how are they looking as far as PSA infection? So that's what this graph is about. So up the side, and I've just presented dieback percentage here, and this would be mainly shoot dieback, because we only have seen, and this is a snapshot in time, the monitoring guys have, this is on one day what they saw, one Green 14 vine had exudate. So that's why I'm focusing on the dieback here. So up the side you have 0 to 5%, and again Gold 3 is the orange and Green 14 is the green. So you can see even at the highest rate it's below 4% of shoots had some dieback on these orchards, and if you took the average across both varieties it was 1%. Now a bit of context, because as I said this was a snapshot in time. So for instance Orchard C, which had Gold 3 and Green 14 on it, the grower had been round just before the monitoring team was there and had taken out the majority of his infected tips on both those orchards. So when our guys went round, it was all looking pretty good, and they said what remained at that time looked healthy, but we will keep monitoring and talking to that grower about this orchard. To give some sense of comparability, on the Hort 16A we were monitoring, one had 100% cut out and the other had 75% of dieback. So, under 4% relative to what we were seeing with Hort 16A is quite a difference. So you might be thinking, okay, that was all winter grass, what happens if we wanted to do a bit of summer grafting? Well, no answers as yet, but there are a couple of smart Kiwis underway to help answer these questions. So the first one is looking, can we establish the new cultivars and males under high inoculum pressure, looking at different grafting windows, December, January and February. The other one is looking at different grafting techniques in that period and seeing how successful they will be. Right, the next monitoring program. The aim of this one was, again, it's a snapshot of getting the PSA status of all G3 orchards in the Te Puke priority zone. So to date, we've got around 85% of the hectares of growers that grafted in 2010, which is 70% of growers. So 85% of the hectares, 70% of the growers we've got round so far. Now, just some more context around this. What we measured was dieback, and we had a couple of categories under that, and I'll go through the results of each of those as we go through. Then we look at the next level of severity, if you like, cane dieback, and then we looked at leader dieback, or leader cankers, exudate. So, shoot dieback. So the first category we measured on was per plant, if there was 1 or 2 shoots with dieback, how many orchards had that? So up the side here, you've got 0 to 100%, And you have an orchard here that had 30% of his or her plants had 1 or 2 shoots per plant affected. And then we go down, there's actually 43 orchards. Each bar is an orchard there, and there's a number that had none, so hence you can't see those. On average of the plants that we monitored, 2.5% had 1 or 2 shoots on the plant infected. So the next level under shoot dieback was 3 to 5 shoots per plant. How did this start looking? So now we're building on the blue with red, and you can see there's just a small amount starting to come on top of those bars. The next level we looked at was 5 or more per plant, and that is the green. Now you've probably noticed there's a new bar there with no colour in it. If you can see, there's an outline which is up to 100%. So now I'll just talk through each of these orchards that were over 10%, including that orchard. Now the reason that orchard isn't coloured in, if you like, is because it's one that we haven't monitored. But the grower had said that he'd remove between 5 to 7 shoots tips per plant on this orchard. So that's why we've put it in there. We will go and monitor that orchard ourselves as well. The second orchard there, the spray program on that orchard, that's near 100%. It had 2 coppers, the last being at bud break, and then followed a biological program, and Actigard was applied in November. Orchard 2 up there is a block stress from water. Orchards 3 and 4 had no spray programs. Orchard 5 has Hort 16A in the same block, and Orchard 6 is up number 4 road. It has Hort 16A in the next block, of which now most has been removed. So let's keep going to that next level of severity, cane dieback percentage. Now first I want to highlight the orchard that was number 1 before. What was the cane dieback looking like on that orchard? It was under 3%. There were 4 plants, and again this is from the grower himself, that are infected so far. The next one we wanted to highlight was orchard 4. Now this is the only orchard which we monitored that had fresh cane dieback. The rest of those scored seem to be dry and old with no new progression. Right, let's start talking, and then we have exudate, or leader cankers. So the scale has changed. We're going up to 5% here now, so that's not 100 at the top, 0 to 5%. Again, firstly, I'll talk about that orchard that was number 1 under shoot dieback. It's under 1%, which actually represents 1 vine so far has been observed as having leader cankers. Now, that orchard number 1 on this graph at 4%. This photo that you're looking at was actually from that orchard. It was tagged with that white ribbon on the 30th of November, and this photo has been taken 6 weeks later, so it was taken mid-January this year. You can see all the fruit past the point of the canker is still looking good, and if you peel back the bark, it seems the plant is callousing, and I've been on this orchard, and when I went, it was probably about 3 weeks ago, it certainly did look like that. But we will keep following this and to see what keeps happening as we progress through the season. Just on the other orchards, the other 6 orchards up there, or the other 5, they were younger plants, and which leaders were pulled down in December. So, how does this all look in summary? So if we put it all together, of all the plants we monitored, 96% had no symptoms of PSA. And I mentioned it before, the plants that had 1 to 2 shoots with dieback was 2.5%. Those with 2 to 5 shoots with dieback was 0.1%. 5 or more shoots with dieback, 0.4%. And then, again, as we go through severity, we had 0.6% having cane dieback and leader cankers, 0.1%. Remembering we'd been around 43 orchards to get this information. Some examples, and just to give an overall impression too from the guys that were out there monitoring, the trend for G3, it appears that if a shoot fires from below the infection, then that new shoot continues to grow. And some people talk about compartmentalising. of the infection in some of these new varieties. That's yet to be proven, but it's certainly typically not something we would see in Hort 16A. The other thing is, and that was that bottom picture is showing you, this is a young plant. This is a stump here, and these are the new leaders coming up. You can see the shoot dieback there, and then one down here with good extension. The other observation is, and it reiterates what Stuart was saying really, that these new varieties, or G3 in this case, still need sprays and hygiene between plants. It's tolerant, it's not resistant. Okay, the last monitoring program that I'm going to talk to you about today, speed of progression. What we did here, we are monitoring 5 half-hectare blocks each for Gold 3, Gold 9 and Green 14. We started this monitoring back in the 1st of October last year, and at that time all these orchards were PSA undetected or untested. And they're distributed across the Te Puke Priority Zone and all fruiting female vines. To date, we've had 2 of the 5 of each of those variety blocks be tested positive for PSA. So 2 of the Gold 3 have tested positive for PSA, 2 of Gold 9 and 2 of Green 14. So I'm just going to take you through a couple of those blocks now. This is our orchard that's been most severely affected, I suppose, in this under this monitoring program. So you can see the G3, it got tested pretty early being positive for PSA, had some infection here. We haven't put in here any spotting, so this is shoot dieback or higher that will be presented on this graph. So it got some infection, it stayed pretty much the same, but then we got into this rain in December and it went off, and then we've got close to 27%, and generally that's cane dieback at the moment, and that's what's on that table at 21%. The G14 rather, we're monitoring in this orchard as well. It's got a block there. That was sort of trucking along okay. It did get some spotting around the end of November, but then it started showing some sort of dieback, again around that Christmas period, beginning of January, so it's just under 10% now. This orchard has no, as far as we're aware, active protectant or management program. Hayward is next door, that is spotting, so it's in a relatively high inoculum pressure. The Gold 3 is 1 year off the graft, and the Green 14 is 2 years off the graft. The next example we have is a block 2 blocks we're monitoring on the same orchard of Gold 3 and Gold 9. So this is sort of at the other end, if you like, of those that have been infected. So again, going along with no real symptoms. There was some spotting starting to show here, but then with that infection period, just under 2%. G3 and G9 similar in this orchard. Now this orchard is under high inoculum pressure. There's a Hort 16A right next door that is showing considerable dieback. But there does seem to be less infection at the far end of the orchard, which is bounded by dairy paddocks. Both these varieties on this orchard are 1 year off the graft. The grower appears to be spraying fortnightly. So, in summary, take-home messages. Again, it's really reinforcing some of what Stuart had to say. So to date, and on balance, in general, Gold 3, Gold 9 and Green 14 seem to be establishing and holding up well to PSA, relative to what we're seeing with Hort 16A. However, although all these varieties appear to have a degree of tolerance, they will require some level of intervention, and we've seen some examples of that today. Inoculum load, sprays, vine management programs and weather will obviously all affect on the PSA infection levels. Remembering, this data is a snapshot in time, so the work continues. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. I'm sure you'll all wait round. We'll cover some questions around G3 at the end of the presentations. We're going to change tack just slightly, and Braden's going to come up and join us and give us a few KVH seasonal messages and some reminders.
How you doing? This is going to be very quick. I want you to think of this as the commercial break between the heavy scientific stuff, but it doesn't mean you can bugger off to the toilet. So focus. Okay, so you've heard about tolerance. That's Jane's thing, and the guys that are in that team, we're going to regroup next week, and if we can find any gaps, we're going to try and hit that. And after me, you're going to hear from Jason about what products are working. So I'm not even going to bother to touch that. I just want to go over a couple of updates for you. Now, if you cut your vines off last summer and you're trying to grow some suckers, they're probably looking something like this. And trust me, it's taken a whole lot of love and a whole lot of effort to get it to that stage. And if you've cut off in winter, without even trying, it probably looks like this, nearly ready to graft. But either way, you're looking at those stumps and you're starting to think, how am I going to get those ready for grafting and what should I do? So it's becoming pretty obvious when we go and we look around Hort 16 orchards at the moment that the guys that have got a consistent approach and they're kind of working through maybe once every 7 to 10 days, and they're cutting out secondaries and they're keeping that canopy in reasonably good condition, they look like they're in the best shot to get through and harvest well, and they are obviously going to be in the best position to have good suckers and healthy stumps to get going on. So there's a tough balance between letting your canopy go and keeping some good leaf on there and being ready to graft. And just if I have confused you, I'm saying cut out the secondaries, keep a nice canopy, have it ready to graft. Trust me, when you try and graft and the stumps ooze, it's not a good look. So if you leave it there too long, it doesn't go too well. So what are we going to do about that? We've got a stump care field day coming up. In preparation for grafting. This is the second stump care field day we've had, and the final one we're going to do this year. It's at John Cook's Orchard. It's next Wednesday. So if you're getting into this headspace, it's a good thing to go to. It's well worth it. We had probably 85 guys there last time. So if you're going to need to do that, get up there or send your workers up there. Come along. It'll be good. Now, I have been assured by the competent Zespri Grower Services team that they, in June, will teach anyone that wants to learn how to graft. Even if you're a muppet, they will teach you 99% how to graft, okay? They've guaranteed me that, and I have no reason to disbelieve their capability. So we will do the getting ready, and then in June we will hand you off to Neil and Sue, and they will just knock you out of the park there. Okay, what else we got? Coming up pretty soon, obviously getting into harvest, and so we're producing another one of these little guides here. This is an orchard biosecurity guide that you can hand to your rogues before they mess up your orchard, and we'll have that up for you in the next couple of weeks. So thanks to Matt Johnson and Simon Cook for the effort there. Simon made a great model. Now, it wouldn't be KVH without reminding you of hygiene. That's what we do all the time, and I just want to let you know there's been a few cases in the past week of the first thing showing up as being exudate. So before they've seen anything in the canopy, any spots, they're seeing some exudate or some exudate on the stump or some white oozing. And for me, that kind of just reiterates the importance of your hygiene within blocks, especially if you think you've got a variety that you're going to keep past this harvest. You can easily spread that stuff without knowing it. So I kind of have the motto on my orchard that we just keep our foot on the gas. We do things as best as we can until we learn that we can take our foot off in certain areas. So I would suggest that. Last but not least, Shane's want me to let you know about this Focus Orchard field day starting on the 22nd, and just a discussion about how we're going to get this fruit that's already starting to shrivel on the vines not into the tray, and how we're going to get the good stuff there. So well worth going to be going to this year. Okay, and details in the Kiwi flyer, or else there's a stack of the notices outside. But that's me.
Thank you. Even a muppet like me might come to your field day. Jason Benj is going to give us a quick overview now of the PSA testing program in particular. I think Jason's going to focus on the field trial information. Much of this is already up on the KVH website, but I'm just making small talk, Jace, while you finish your drink. Come on up.
Afternoon, everyone. I don't know about you guys, but I think I preferred the Madonna halftime break at the Super Bowl on the weekend to Braden's little break there. But you take what you can get, I suppose, in this game. So we've heard a lot about the genetics today already. So what I'm going to focus on is the management aspects of working through this crisis that we're all grappling with at the moment. So at the last grower meeting just before Christmas, I alluded to the potted plant field trials that were about to be started. So today I'm going to present the results from two completed field trials, one on Hort 16A and one on Hayward. So the 16A trial started at the beginning of December. And just to give you an overview of what's involved in the field trials, we use PSAV-free potted plants. In this case, the plants came from Tauranga, and that was back in August that we sourced those. They were grafted in 2010 onto Bruno rootstocks. So they were shifted to our holding facility in Rotorua in August. And just prior to the trial, or at the start of the trial, we applied various treatments to those plants. So there were 16 treatments in total, and each treatment was applied to 20 plants. Then we shifted the plants to our field trial site in Te Puke, which is already infected with PSAV. And when they arrived, we immediately inoculated. We actively applied PSAV at a concentration of 10 to the 6 CFUs per mil. The plants were then laid out randomly in a block at the field trial site, and they were wetted with overhead irrigation for, in this case, about 48 hours. The reason we did that was to maximise infection. Following that, leaf spotting across all the plants was assessed weekly, and the key here is that the assessments are done consistently and by the same person, because the assessment is a visual assessment, it's subjective, so it's really important that each plant at each time is assessed in exactly the same way. I'd just like to acknowledge also Hort Evaluation, led by Linda Hawes, who is undertaking this fieldwork. So I have quite a few slides that look like this, so I'll just spend a bit of time on this one in particular explaining what you're looking at. So along the bottom you'll see a list of the treatments that were applied in this trial. Up the side is the percentage of leaf spotting, and that's an average value across the 20 plants that were treated in each treatment. Now, the important thing to look at here is the red line running across the graph, and that's the level of leaf spotting that was observed on the PSA control. So those are the plants which were not where no products were applied and they were inoculated. So they were unprotected and sprayed with PSAV at 10 to the 6. You'll see in this first slide, bearing in mind the low level of leaf spotting that was present after 1 week or 8 days in this case, that with the exception of hydrogen peroxide and the agriphage treatments, leaf spotting and all the other treatments was below that observed in the PSA control. So what that means is that initially, with the exception of hydrogen peroxide and the agriphage treatments, the other treatments were suppressing leaf spotting or the development of leaf spots. Should also just point out that most of these products were applied just once before the inoculation. The exceptions were the bioalexin, which was applied twice, and the agriphage, which were applied multiple times for 4 weeks after inoculation. So if we just skip ahead to 3 weeks after inoculation, you'll see similar patterns in the data. So if you look at the red line, you'll see that for the copper treatments and the ActiGuard, the level of leaf spotting is below that of the PSA control. By this time, it looks like bioalexin, its ability to suppress leaf spotting has run out, if you like. And again, hydrogen peroxide and the agriphages, as you can see, have, in this case, leaf spotting, which is actually higher than the PSA control. And Serenade Max as well. Similar sort of patterns over time. So we're skipping ahead another week here to 29 days after inoculation. So again, the coppers, the leaf spotting in those treatments is all lower than that in the PSA control. And with the other treatments, there is no significant reduction in leaf spotting at this time. One of the main observations in the trial was phytotoxicity, particularly in the copper treatments. So bear in mind these are young potted plants, but the level of phytotoxicity was very noticeable in the copper treatments. So that's an issue that we need to think about going forward. A positive out of all of this is that of the two Nordox treatments, we had a summer rate for Nordox and a rate that was below the summer rate. And in terms of efficacy, there was no significant difference between the two. So what that indicates to us is that there is an opportunity to reduce the copper rates without losing efficacy. So the take-home messages from this initial trial on 16A, bear in mind December was a very wet month, particularly in the first week of this trial. Coppers and key strepto significantly reduced leaf spotting throughout the trial. And again, just remember they were applied once. The elicitors and Serenade Max appeared to reduce leaf spotting early on, but not in latter weeks. Hydrogen peroxide and agriphages did not reduce leaf spotting at any time in the trial. Bear in mind hydrogen peroxide was applied just the once prior to inoculation, and there is some work out there indicating that multiple applications with hydrogen peroxide, could be efficacious. In this case, it was just one application and it wasn't efficacious. And then the issue of phytotoxicity. So going forward, we'll certainly be considering testing lower rates of coppers in particular. So the second trial, similar to the first trial, but conducted in Hayward. So for this, we actually used Hayward plants that were propagated up in Kerry last spring. So they were grafted last spring onto Bruno rootstocks. They were shifted down to Rotorua in November, just prior to the trial commencing. We reduced the number of treatments down to 10, just because we had a lot of problems trying to fit 16 treatments in the initial trial, so we had to reduce based on that. Again, 20 replicates per treatment. Now, the plants were inoculated at the field site, but at this time they were inoculated at a lower rate of 10 to the 4. Now, that was unintentional because of a problem we had with preparation of the inoculum for this trial. Having said that, we still got a lot of really valuable information out of the trial, as you'll see shortly. So the first thing I should point out in this graph is that because of the lower level of inoculum that was used, the amount of leaf spotting or the development of the leaf spotting was much slower. So on this graph you'll see the blue dotted line. So that's the level of leaf spotting that we saw in the 16A PSA control after 1 week. The red line here is what we saw in this trial with Hayward for the PSA control. So you'll see it's much lower. And we think while the environment and the fact that it's a different variety may have contributed to this, my gut feeling is that the biggest factor was the lower level of inoculum that we used. So the key messages from this slide then are that with the exception of Serenade Max, all the treatments reduce leaf spotting. Again, you have to bear in mind we're talking about very low levels of leaf spotting here, less than 1%. But when you run the stats on the numbers, with the exception of Serenade Max, all the treatments are significantly lower, which means they have reduced leaf spotting. Skip ahead to 16 days for the Hayward. Again, when you run the numbers, all the treatments have reduced leaf spotting relative to the PSA control, again with the exception of Serenade Max. If we move ahead to 23 days, we see that the level of leaf spotting is increasing over time. Again, all the treatments with the exception of Serenade Max have reduced leaf spotting. Same pattern and message again after 29 days. All the treatments, with the exception of Serenade Max, has reduced leaf spotting. And finally, after 37 days, you'll see there, again, the treatments, with the exception of Serenade Max, have reduced leaf spotting. So just some of the key messages from the Hayward trial then. And it was even wetter during this trial, in the second and third weeks of the trial. So bear that in mind. But given that, we still, with the treatments, reduced leaf spotting significantly throughout, with, again, the exception of Serenade Max. And, of course, the phytotox issue, which I've already talked about. So just thinking ahead, the Zespri field trial is actually stalled at the moment because, unfortunately, the plants in Rotorua have been confirmed to now have PSA V. We think that's a consequence of the weather and the wet weather we had in December. And so we think it's moved down to Rotorua in the weather. Having said that, all is not lost. There are a couple of trials currently underway at the field trial site which are being conducted by chemical companies. That work's being done on Bruno with a number of products that we will be testing going forward on Hayward and 16A. Now, we have a contingency plan which involves bringing more plants down from Kerikeri. So the plan is that trials will recommence in about a couple of weeks from now. So once that is in action, there are three main areas that we'll be interested in. Firstly, we'll continue to screen products and look for the ones that are the most efficacious. We'll also try and get a better understanding of how long products are efficacious for. And as you saw with the phytotox results I presented, we'll also see if we can identify minimum application rates of products which give us efficacy. So that's our thinking going forward. And just to finish off with, so all of the information I presented to you today is now available on the KVH website. So just navigate your way to the KVH website, click on number 5 there, and you'll get a drop-down list. Click on the product testing link, and that will take you through to the page you can see here. And also included there are the greenhouse testing results. So if you want more details, then please go to the website and read the reports.
Thank you, Jason. Jason didn't point out that on the phytotox work, we've got a parallel trial running to understand phytotox, understand how we can overcome phytotox. I know that's quite an area of interest for people, so at a future one of these meetings, we'll give you an update on what's happening in that program.